Hello, in previous two episodes I described you the enormous history of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 16th and 17th century when this country had its peak in power in the beginning of 17th century when Polish and Lithuanian Commonwealth reached over 1 million square kilometers. And today in the third episode I will describe you the decline of this great state in the middle of 17th century and later the great victory near Vienna in 1683 when Polish hussars won with Turks, and then I will tell you what happened briefly, what happened next, why this Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was destroyed in the following 18th century. But I will not describe the 18th century history in details, just briefly, because this series is about 17th century. So we stopped when the Władysław IV, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, dies in 1648. And in the same time we had great Cossack rebellion in Ukraine. Bohdan Khmelnytsky led few thousand men and also about 10,000 Tatar cavalry against Polish forces. And in this moment we were totally unprepared for such a great force coming on us from the steppe. So we sent an army, and this army was totally annihilated, and it was shock for great country to be annihilated by peasants. Polish and Lithuanian nobility considered Cossacks to be mostly peasants. So army of peasants plus Tatar cavalry, it was lightly armed using archaic bows cavalry, so it wasn't normally a very strong threat to us. But now these combined forces, Cossacks with very strong infantry and swift, very fast Tatar cavalry, was a combination that we could not face with victory. So we lost 3 battles one after another, because after first loss we sent another army, and this army was not well prepared, poorly commanded, and was destroyed, and another and another. And in fact, in 2 years from 1648 to 1650, this rebellion spread all present Ukraine, and we were unable to stop them. But fortunately, Tatars were mainly interested in looting and in imprisoning people to sell them in Crimea to Turkish Empire. So after 2 years, Tatars were no longer interested in participating in this conflict. And on the other side, Polish nobility and Lithuanian nobility united, and they made a law, made new conscription, and they prepared forces to finally stop this rebellion. And very important figure who was dealing with the rebellion was Jeremy Wiśniowiecki. He was a Polish Rus from present-day Ukraine, and he was suppressing this rebellion with great force. But the milk was spilled, and Cossacks destroyed a lot of towns. They were mainly killing Jewish population and Polish population because they don't like either of them. And they thought that Jews with Polish nobility are responsible for the oppression they had in the previous years. But after we united our forces to finally win with them, they started to look for another ally. And this ally was Orthodox Moscow state, and Tsar of Moscow was willing to take Cossacks under their authority as vassals. And in 1654, in Pereyaslav, Cossacks agreed to become vassals to Moscow state. And this is very important turning point in history, because before that date, Cossacks were always under Polish command, and now they switched sides and wanted to be under Moscow. So Moscow was setting foot in Kiev, in this region, because they agreed to be their vassals. But this doesn't help Cossacks too much, because their situation was already quite grim. So later on they split into two parties, one of which was supporting Polish court and Polish king, Jan Kazimir, and the other side was supporting Russia. And finally Ukraine was split as the Dnieper river, so the one side was for Russia and the second side was for Poland. But this whole crisis with Cossacks and this rebellion showed that Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is very weak at this point of history, and it was a great opportunity for Sweden to invade Poland from the north, because our king, John Casimir, was from Vasa dynasty, and he was calling himself king of Goths, Vandals and Swedes, and he had some pretensions to crown of Sweden. And it was obvious casus belli for this conflict. So Sweden invaded us from the north, and as we were unable, as I told you before, fight with Tatars and Cossacks in the east, we are also completely unable to fight with Swedes when they're invaded in 1655. So we were losing. They were looting all old Polish territories that were unlooted for decades, even centuries, because we had very peaceful time and Poland was very strong, so no one was looting their core lands. And now Swedes were able to conquer Warsaw. They almost conquered Krakow. They were conquering Poznań, of course Gdańsk, and so on. And even Polish king escaped to Silesia behind Polish border because he was unable to face this great invasion. And we call it in our history the Swedish flood, because they spelled all over the country. And in this situation, when we have Swedish army roaming around Poland, and in Lithuania, head of Lithuanian nobility, Janusz Radziwiłł, is pledging his vassal to be a vassal for Swedish king, because he sees that Polish king escaped and there is no one who can control this territory. And in this situation, Russia is invading us from the east, because they don't want Sweden to be too superior and to conquer too much land in former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And so you can see in 1656 and 1657, Poland and Lithuania were virtually unable to fight back, but some people call it miracle, but I will tell you what happened. Swedish Protestant army was besieging Częstochowa. Is a very important sanctuary in Poland where Polish troops with peasants and with clergy tried to defend this fortified church, the sanctuary, against these Protestants. And it wasn't a very important battle, very big battle, but it was very important in case of propaganda, because this hill, this sanctuary, was successfully defended by Polish troops, and it was first important victory in this war. And then Jan Kazimir, King of Poland, came back to Lwów. In Lwów, he gave Poland under the care of Holy Mother Mary, and he started to raise troops and to repel this invasion. And also Habsburgs from Austria helped him with some troops, because he was quite a relative with Habsburgs. And for another years, mainly due to guerrilla warfare, Poland was able to fight back the Swedes, and finally in 1660 the Swedish invasion was over, but at the great cost. The great cost of hundreds of thousands of people slain by this invasion. And of course, Swedes were looting enormous amount of goods from Poland. They even stole our doors, our furniture for our palaces. And today you can see all these old Polish, for example, furniture from 17th century in Stockholm, in their museums and in their private properties. And after defeating Swedes, we were able to win under Polonka in 1660 with Russians, and we secured our eastern border. But we lost part of Ukraine, as I told you before. So after 12 years, Poland was still very weak, but we managed to defend our country, and this country wasn't destroyed as Sweden and Russia and Cossacks wanted to be. But what happened next? And what happened next is a great tragedy in our Polish history, because these people who barely survive these great invasions and this horrible war started to fighting among themselves. 6 years later, in 1666, civil war started in Poland, and two sides fought on a battlefield, and thousands of Polish noblemen were killed in the civil war because they cannot agree about some politics, and some of them don't wanted John Casimir to be the king, and some of them supported him and his reforms because he wanted to change this country so this country could not be so easily attacked from all sides. But strong party don't wanted to reform this state in this proposition that king made, so they rebelled, and this civil war ended with great bloodshed among ourselves. Later, John Casimir abdicated. He saw that he could not change this country, and he resigned. And then Polish nobility did something extraordinary. They elected new king that was from Poland, because they don't wanted foreign king as we have previously. And this was something extraordinary. They elected son of Jeremy Wiśniowiecki, the one who was very successful in quelling the rebellion in Ukraine, but his son was Michael was very weak ruler, and his short rule was nothing good from Poland. But the state was also very sick. For example, I will tell you that his marriage, his wedding, was as expensive as 1/3 of Polish state yearly income. So you can imagine this great feast, and you can imagine also how small the income of our country was and how poorly it was managed. Later, after his death, we decided, the nobility, to elect another Polish king, and this one was John III Sobieski. And he was much more able commander. He was elected mostly because while Michael Korybut-Wiśniewiecki was dying, he won a great battle under Chocim against the Turks. And by winning this battle, he was national hero, and immediately he was elected as a new king. And John Sobieski was also really a good commander, and he was able to win some battles in the east and in the south against Tatars and Turks, but unfortunately there was still this great problem that Polish nobility don't want to spend money to support army, and therefore Sobieski, even though he was winning great victories, he was unable to win the war because there were no money to support army for longer periods of time, so the war could be concluded in our victory. And also he had strong opposition inside, and for example Lithuanian nobility was very against and was even sabotaging military expeditions of John Sobieski. And one of such sabotage I will tell you briefly, because as you know, in 1683 great Turkish army marched north to conquer Vienna. Vienna was the capital of Habsburg Empire, and Habsburgs defeated would open the gates for Europe to Turks, so it was very important event. Very big 150,000 men army was besieging Vienna, and Vienna was about to collapse, and Austria sent begging message to our king for help, and he collected cavalry, mainly Husaria, and he marched very promptly south, and in the September 1683 we won a great battle against Turkish Empire near the walls of Vienna. Austrian army, Polish army together charged on the Turks, and Polish Husaria was this panzer division of 17th century, and we were able to completely destroy part of Turkish army, and they had to escape very briefly from the besiege of Vienna. So it was great victory for Poland, but also it was unable to be crafted in some good gains for our country. We didn't gain almost anything except some loot from Turkish camp, because when Lithuanian reinforcements finally came to Austria and to present-day Hungary, they started to loot this territory, and we had to stop this war because they were causing much more trouble than good for us. So great victory, but without any big political good consequences for our state. And John III Sobieski was last Polish king that could really change something, but the corruption was so strong in Poland at this point, and the enmity between people inside was so strong that in fact he was unable to reform the country, but because this country needed very strong reforms to make it manageable. Anarchy was growing and growing, and then came 18th century, and in 18th century this anarchy was growing stronger and stronger. Polish nobility and Lithuanian nobility was unable to make some reforms to heal this country, and our enemies grew stronger, mainly Prussia, Russia, and later Austria. And finally, as you may know, in the end of 18th century, Poland was divided among these three countries and disappeared from the map of the Europe for 123 years, and we re-emerged in 1980 after the First World War. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this brief talk about 17th century history of Poland. See you again in next movie.